Okay, well, I'm glad we got the memo. So we are planning on keeping the shear at 7 o'clock for the season. Again, if there are at least three people that are interested in meeting in person on a regular basis, let me know. Otherwise, I'll be doing this from my home as I am now, or from my office. So you just let me know. But I'm happy to have all you guys on here with me virtually as well. So we have a very fun Gemara tonight. What I mean by fun is that there's going to be a number of very fundamental concepts that we want to know and that we're going to elaborate on. Just one, because I can't hold my excitement. What's one of my favorite halachic concepts, Toby? You know what it is? You quoted in your in your Kol Nidre appeal last year.
Tircha de Tzibura.
Very good, Toby. So Tircha de Tzibura is the principle that you're not supposed to be imposing on people's time. And people like myself and in my line of work, we tend to be some of the biggest violators of that principle. And we're going to see a story in the Gemara tonight in which a rabbi actually made sure not to violate that, was very careful about not violating it. Anyway, there's going to be a number of interesting things we're going to learn, but just to give you a little bit of an overview, we're going.
I'm sorry, what daf are we on?
Oh, sorry, we are on Chaf Beis Amud Beis. That is 22b, all the way at the top, just 4 words into the page, Tashma. So where we left off was we're trying to determine on a public fast day, on a Tainus Tzibor, do we lane 3 aliyos or 4 aliyos? The thing is, the Mishnah doesn't tell us. The Mishnah tells us on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbos Mincha, I lane 3. And it tells me on, how many do we lane today? On Chol Hamoed and Rosh Chodesh, I lane 4 aliyos. So is a Tainus Tzibor more similar to a typical weekday, or does it have enough of the qualities that Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed have? So we're going to make one final attempt, and the attempt actually will be very clear to tell us what we actually paskin. Following that, we're going to talk about prostrating and bowing during davening, which actually was very relevant for us on Yom Kippur. I was in the tent for Musaf on Yom Kippur. It was pouring rain outside, and I told everyone, I said, I was like looking up the halacha just to make sure, and I saw that the Yemenites actually don't do any prostrating during the service, at least from what I read in Pnei Halacha. So I said, guys, we're all going to be Teimanim, we're all going to be Yemenites today. Some people actually, they were Moser Nefesh, they really were dedicated, and they got down on all fours, despite the fact that the ground was really dirty. The whole time, I was just like really anxious about my tzitzis being dragged through the dirty water. I see everyone in the tent with like their black tzitzis. I'm like, I don't even know how to clean that. So the whole time I was just like adjusting my talis. But as they say, Zilzaina kapara. So maybe that's should be a source of an atonement. Okay. So that's basically what we have to look forward to tonight. So let's jump into the Gemara, and God willing, I'm hoping we have time. I was in Toby's neck of the woods at 5 Towns a while ago. I picked up the Birchas Avraham on Megillah, which is a very recent, excellent work that really gives you just a really great analysis of some of the lumdus and underpinning concepts. And what he's going to address is a little bit about Rosh Chodesh. You know what? Let's jump into the Gemara. Why am I saying it all outside? Let's see the words inside. So, all the way at the top. Tashma. So let's see if we can determine how many aliyos we have on a public fast day, on a Tainus Tzibor. Zeha klau, kol sheyesh bo bitol malacha, la'am, kagon Tainus Tzibor, v'tisha b'av koren gimel. So it's pretty explicit over here from the Bryce we're quoting. As long as there is a concern of bittul malacha, such as on a Tainus Tzibor or Tisha B'av, we read 3 aliyos. Why? Because even though there are certain restrictions on fast days, you really shouldn't be working the first part of the day of Tisha B'av. You need to go work after Chatzos. But fundamentally, one is able to go to work on a fast day. So because one has to go to work on a fast day, we have a concern that by adding on even one extra aliyah, it's going to cause someone to miss their train. You think I might be joking, but I'm at the 6:30 chakras every morning. And there was one individual I saw today that he literally went out a minute or two before Mourner's Kaddish, and he missed that because he had to catch his train. So, one aliyah really could make all the difference. So, but on days when people are presumed not to be working, right? Who's going to work on Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, right? Koren Dalid. So we read 4 aliyos because we have extra time on those days. Shema Mina. So I don't know about you. I've been working on Chol Hamoed. But so who is not working on Chol Hamoed, presumably?
Day school teachers.
Day school teachers. Well, not at our day school, apparently.
Yeah.
Like cultural's the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
But actually, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi tells us, if you look at Rashi, Dibor Hamaskil, Rashi Chadashim, where you just listen, Ebo Bittul Malacha Kol Kach, there isn't as much Bittul Malacha. Some people are refraining from work. Who are they? Not the day school teachers per se, but She'ein HaNashim Osos Malacha Behen. Women do not work on Rosh Chodesh. You hear that, guys?
Oh, sure.
Well, at least back then. So the question is, why do they not? So you look a little further, Rashi says, Ushamati mipi mori hazaki in Zechrona Livracha. So he's quoting his teacher, Shenisna lehem mitzvah zo b'shil shelo pirku nismein be'egel. This was a gift that God gave them, because when all the men were jumping forward to give their money in order to create the golden calf, it was the women who said, this might be a nice avodah zarah, but I'm not giving up my jewelry for this. So because they refrained, obviously because they didn't want to participate in the avodah zarah, in the sin, not to preserve their jewelry, therefore Hashem rewarded them by saying, you could take a day off once a month on Rosh Chodesh. Now the question, which we'll deal with if we have time, is this like an option? It's a reshus, it's a schus that women can take off if they want to in Jewish society? Or is it, if you look in Tosfos uses slightly different language. It's the first Tosfos on the daf. They say, V'yesh lomar, devade muterhu b'asiyas malacha la'nashim, avol nashim asuros b'malacha. But women are forbidden to engage in work on Rosh Chodesh. Even if they want to work, it'd be forbidden.
But how are you defining work? They don't make meals?
All right, so what kind of work?
After the meals? The husbands are doing this all of a sudden?
It's a great question. Oh, it's a good question.
I mean, so what's the work that they're not doing?
Right, and maybe with the husband had to do the dishes.
Maybe laundry. That's about it.
The laundry, right? The laundry. Laundry is certainly a form of a malacha. I mean, on Chol Hamoed. Well, Chol Hamoed's not the best example of a malacha of laundry, because the real reason that we don't do laundry in Chol Hamoed, because on one hand, especially nowadays, it's very easy to do laundry. It's not a tircha. It's not something that presents such a difficulty. It's not strenuous, but it's the same reason that some men won't be shaving on Chol Hamoed, because if you knew that you could shave during Chol Hamoed, you might be more lazy and say, I don't need to shave before Sukkot. I can always do it over Chol Hamoed. Who cares about that stubble? Similarly, if one knew that they can do laundry over Chol Hamoed, they would say, I don't need to take care of finishing laundry before Sukkot. I have all Chol Hamoed to do it. So maybe not the best analogy, because fundamentally, doing laundry may not be as strenuous, at least nowadays. Back then, doing laundry was quite the task, is my understanding. Okay. But anyway, we'll come back to the men and women points soon. Let's just go through the Gemara first. So, what's the point? What we see from here is, it says, black on white, that on fast days, how many aliyos are there? 3 aliyos. Great. That resolves our problem. But Rav Ashi's not happy. I'm Rav Ashi. Didn't we teach Zehak Klau, Kol Yom Sheyesh Bo Musa, the Eno Yom Tov, Koren Arba. We said any day that there is a musaf, meaning it can be additional prayers, not necessarily a carbon musaf, and it's not a Yom Tov. Still, we have 4 aliyos. So asui mai lav asui taitzi or Tisha B'av. Rav Ashi is hanging on this reading of our Mishnah. The Mishnah already tells me that we have 4 aliyos on Rosh Chodesh, we have 4 aliyos on Chol HaMoed. And then on top of that, the Mishnah tells me, and any day that has additional prayers, but is not a Yom Tov, you also read 4 on those days. Well, it can't be coming to teach me Rosh Chodesh. It can't be coming to tell me there's 4 aliyos on Chol HaMoed, because the Mishnah already explicitly told me that. So what would the Mishnah implicitly be including in this category? The only thing I'm left with is a public fast day, a Titus Seaboard. So then how do I make sense of the Mishnah, which seems to indicate that there's 4 aliyos on a public fast day? So Rav Ashi Masnisa on money. The thing is, Rav Ashi's reading just won't work because there's no Tana that adopts Rav Ashi's position that there's 4 aliyos on a fast day. Lo Tana Kama v'lo Rabbi Yossi. It's neither the Tana Kama or Rabbi Yossi in the following Bryce, the Tanya. Chalios Bashiva Chamishi. If Tisha B'av falls out on Monday or Thursday. Koren Gimel. We read 3 aliyos after Echad, and then the last guy does the Haftorah. The Shlishi Reviv, if it falls out on Tuesday or Wednesday. Kore Echad after Echad. Then there's only 1 aliyah, and that guy also lanes the Haftorah. Rabbi Yossi Omer, the second opinion in that brisa, Rabbi Yossi says, La'olam Koren Gimel after Echad. No matter when Tisha B'av falls out, it's always 3 aliyos, and the final guy lanes the Haftorah. Point being is, whether you hold like the Tana Kama, whether you hold like Rabbi Yossi, all the Tanaitic positions seem to espouse and take for granted that Tisha B'av is maximum going to have 3 aliyos, definitely not 4. And then certainly for any other fast day, it would only be 3. But you'll ask, Velekasha, Zehaklal, Lasui Rosh Chodesh Umoed. It can't. So still, how am I going to make sense of our Mishnah, which seems to indicate that there is another category that has 4 aliyos? Lasui Rosh Chodesh Umoed. Is it coming to tell me that Rosh Chodesh and Moed I have 4 aliyos? But the Mishnah already explicitly told me that I have 4 aliyos on Rosh Chodesh and Chol Moed. So if so, what's the Mishnah coming to include? What's the Mishnah adding with this implication I would not have known otherwise? So you know what? We're just going to have to, for lack of a better term, lav dafka the Mishnah, and you'll see what I mean. Simna ba'alma yahiv. The Mishnah was just explaining the rationale. It was giving you the general criteria. So that you shouldn't think that Yom Tov and Chol HaMoed are one and the same. As we know, we're having a shiur right now on virtually on our laptops, on our computers. So it's very evident to us that Chol HaMoed does not carry the same regulations as Yom Tov. But the Mishnah wanted to make sure that that was crystal clear. Therefore, it taught us as follows. Remember this fundamental principle. The more significant something is than the other, it will have more aliyos than the other category. Hilkach, Rosh Chodesh Moed, Ika Karban Musaf, Koren Arba. Therefore, on Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, which has a carbon musaf, we read 4 aliyos. The Yom Tov da'aseh b'siyas malacha chamisha. On Yom Tov, where we're not allowed to do most forms of malacha, there are 5 aliyos. The Yom HaKippurim da'anish kares shisha. On Yom HaKippurim, the punishment for Yom Kippur deliberately is divine excision. That's 6 aliyos. Shabbos ika iser skila shiva. And Shabbos, which has skila, stoning for those who deliberately violate it, that has 7 aliyos. But the point being is that we shouldn't make too much of the fact that the Mishnah tells us that in Rosh Chodesh and Chol Moed is 4 aliyos, and then it proceeds not to indicate that there's another category that has 4 aliyos. It's just explaining the rationale. Why do these two things only have 4 aliyos? Because they have a korban musaf, a musaf offering, but they don't quite rise to the level of a bona fide Yom Tov. So that's it. So we conclude only 3 aliyos on a public fast day. And if you don't believe me, just take a sitter off your shelf. You can look in the back and you can see it right there. Okay? Let me pause for a moment. For both sides, do we have any questions? Okay, so you know what? What we're going to do now is the next part of the Gemara is going to talk about prostrating and bowing. It's basically 2 sugyas today. We just finished sugya number 1, which talks about Rosh Chodesh. So I want to talk a little bit about Rosh Chodesh for a moment. First by pointing out kind of what we mentioned before, right? Toby, I know you were very into this about Rosh Chodesh and women not working on it. So there's really 3 shitos. Shita number 1 is Tosos, that it is forbidden for women to work on Rosh Chodesh. It's usher for them. Even if they voluntarily want to, they're not allowed to work. The other shita that the Yerushalmi seems to espouse, and the Torah codifies it, the Torah says that it's not that there's this fundamental ister, but it was a minhag that women took upon themselves. You'll see that actually sometimes. One of the most famous instances of this is in the laws of Nida, which is called Chumrah de Rabbi Zera, in which, so you might wonder how kind of back in the day, a woman who was a Nida, so she didn't need to even have 7 clean days. The notion of having 7 clean days without seeing blood before going to mikvah is for what's called a zava. And we talked about this a while back. But basically, without getting into all the confusing details, the lashon Hechmir B'nos Yisrael Atzman, I believe is how it's put. The daughters of the Jewish people were stringent upon themselves, and without the rabbis, it's like a grassroots. Think about the grassroots women's rights movement. So this was it. The women got together and they said, we are taking upon ourselves that if we see even a little drop of blood, we're going to not be a nida. We're going to take on all the stringencies of being a zava. So, these are like the women's movements that happen in rabbinic Judaism. They take on more chumras upon themselves. They make life harder for themselves. So women took upon themselves, similarly over here, not to work on Rosh Chodesh, which on the one hand can make their life easier. On the other hand, if they have a man in the house and the man says, okay, you're off, well, I'm not doing the laundry, I'm not doing the dishes, then it's really just work piling up. So I'm not really sure how the inner dynamics of that happens. Now, there's a third position which is attributed to Rabbeinu Yerucham, who says that actually there is no broad chiyuv, rather every woman kind of determines themselves if they want to take on this minhag, this midas chasidus, if we would call it. Now, what's the difference? What's the nafkamina? What's the practical consequence of whether it's an isser, whether it's a minhag for everyone, whether it's my personal minhag? Well, let's say a woman realizes that she's always been working on Rosh Chodesh, and she decides, she's been always not working on Rosh Chodesh, and then she decides it's too tough for her. So what do I make of that? So if she stops working on Rosh Chodesh, if she starts working on Rosh Chodesh, according to Tosfos, she's violating the Torah. According to the majority opinion based on the Torah, then she's violating minhag hamakom, presumably. And if it's just a personal practice, so then she would need hataras nedarim. She would, like we do before Rosh Hashanah. So she needs to do hataras nedarim to annul her vow. Why? Because when you do on Haga Tova, you do a positive religious practice voluntarily 3 times without any particular things in mind, you basically are making an implicit vow, an implicit neder to be practicing this going forward. So since she was always refraining from practicing, from working on Rosh Chodesh, now she wants to get a job even on Rosh Chodesh, she would need to do Hataras Nadarim according to Rabbi Yura. Okay, that was one thing. Just put that in a box. The question that interests me the most is the question that is asked by the Turei Even. The Turei Even, we've quoted him many times. He's just one of the best commentaries, honestly, to be using on these Masechtos. So the Turei Even asks the following question. Okay, so let me get this straight. The women are not working on Rosh Chodesh. And because the women are not working on Rosh Chodesh, we can afford to spend more time in shul and add an additional aliyah. But if the men are working on Rosh Chodesh and they still need to catch their trains, and it's very nice that their wives and the women are not working, but if it's the men who are obligated to come to shul and are obligated to hear Torah reading, shouldn't it be based on whether it's bittul malacha for them? Shouldn't it be based on whether the men need to catch the train? Or even if it's based on the men and the women, how can we ignore that the men need to catch a train on Rosh Chodesh? How can we just add on an additional aliyah? So that's the question of the Turei Even. So one answer that's offered that the Birchas Avram himself gives is that actually women themselves, according to what is it? The Magen Avram quotes from Maseches Sofrim a shita that women actually are obligated in Torah reading, just like men. But even if you go with that, he still asks, okay, women are obligated in Torah reading, great, but that doesn't detract from the fact that men also have to be there for Torah reading. So if men also have to be there from Torah reading and they need to catch their trains, what business do we have leading 4 aliyos on Rosh Chodesh? So the answer is basically as follows. As we saw in the Mishnah, essentially, there should be 4 aliyos on Rosh Chodesh. That's the baseline assumption. The baseline assumption is that there are 4 aliyos on Rosh Chodesh because it's not a Yom Tov, but it does have a heightened level of Kedusha. So in order for us to change the status quo and knock it down to only 3 aliyos and diminish the special treatment that it gets, there needs to be a very compelling reason. Now, if everybody needs to get on that train, everyone needs to get to work on Rosh Chodesh, then you know what? We'll forgo the 4 aliyos, we'll knock it down to 3. But if already the women don't need to catch the train, they're not working, then it's just for the men, that's not a compelling enough of a reason to knock down Rosh Chodesh from 4 aliyos to 3 aliyos. Because the baseline is really that it's at 4, and need a compelling reason to push it to 3. Not that it's at 3, now I need a compelling reason to push it to 4. Okay? So that's one answer. The second answer that's given by the Turei Even himself is actually a very long answer. I looked up in Turei Even itself. It goes on forever, but I'll break down the basics. Really, sometimes we think about how the prayers we do in shul are in place of the karbanos, the offerings that we would give in the temple, right? So the way I always imagine it is, well, the offerings are going on in the temple, and I'm free to sit on my couch and play video games while they're doing the work in the temple for me. I'm free to go about my day. I'm free to go to work and carry on with my day as normal. The truth be told is that whenever a karban is being given for me as an individual, I'm not supposed to be doing any work then. I'm supposed to be praying and focused on the offering that's being brought on my behalf. And the Turei Even points out that it's not just true for my personal offering, the karban of the Yachid, but whenever an offering of the Tzibur, of the people, is being offered in the temple, we also are supposed to refrain from work and focus on the theme, the significance of the karban. Now, there is a dispensation for the, you might ask, like, wait, that means I can never go to work because every day the Talmud's being offered in the morning, the Talmud's being offered before the evening. So when can I ever go to work? So the pasuk says, "V'safta degenecha," that you'll have to gather in your grain. So there's a dispensation for the karban Talmud. But the Turei Even wants to suggest that any time a karban is being offered on behalf of the entire Jewish people, other than the Talmud, you're not supposed to be going to work that day. You're supposed to be praying. You're supposed to be involved some way or another in the religious significance of that offering that's being brought on our behalf. We don't just bring the offering and say, all right, Kohanim, have fun with it, catch you later. But we're supposed to be thinking about its significance. Therefore, the Tur Yemen actually says that on Rosh Chodesh, not only did the women refrain from working, but since the Karban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh needs to be brought, then the men didn't go to work either on that day. Now that we can understand that neither the men nor the women went to work that day because of the Karban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, now it definitely makes sense why there's 4 aliyos, because even the men don't have to catch the train on Rosh Chodesh morning. Now, and the argument is that even though nowadays we don't have the Karban and we do need to catch the train, since it's modeled after how we practiced during the times of the temple, it stays at 4 aliyos, even though, alas, we have to catch our trains nowadays on Rosh Chodesh and Chol. Okay, so there you go. That's the Birchas Avraham right over there, and hopefully that gives us a little bit of a deeper appreciation for the notion of Rosh Chodesh and how our timing is always figured out. Okay, any questions before we go forward in the Gemara? All right, let's jump right back in. This next part should flow relatively easily. Gufa. So as we might remember, we had a story of Rav coming to Bavel. It actually does us a favor and gives us the whole story again in case we forgot. Rav Ikla Bavel B'Tanet Sibor. Rav arrived in Babylonia on a public fast day. Kamkar B'Safra, when he got up to read from the Torah, Hasav Berach Hasalil Berach. Remember, he opened up with a blessing, but he did not conclude with a blessing. That was our concern last week. We analyzed why he only made an opening blessing and not a closing blessing. But we didn't analyze the latter part of the story, that when it got time for everyone to bow down, everyone bowed down on their faces, but Rav refrained from bowing on his face. So the question is, my time Rav lo naval ape. Why is Rav being less religiously devout than everybody else? So the answer is Ritzva Shalavanu Haisa, because the floor was made of stone. You might see on Yom Kippur people have paper towels with them, and they put it on the floor for Aleinu whenever they bow down. So I used to think as a kid it's because people were very particular about their suits getting dirty, and so they put it down there so they wouldn't get any dirt on their suits, chas v'shalom. But the halachic reason behind it is because you're not supposed to prostrate on a stone floor. Utanya, the only stone floors one is allowed to prostrate on are the stone floors of the temple in Jerusalem. Anywhere else is forbidden to do so. So as long as it's now here's the thing. I think our shul has carpeting on the floor, if I remember correctly, right? It's carpeting in the sanctuary. So many people just, they want to be more concerned, so they'll be more from, and they'll still use the paper towels anyway. So the point being here is that where Rav was standing in the shul, there was stone on the floor. So therefore, he did not prostrate on the floor because it was in Bavel, it was in Babylonia, it was not in the temple in Jerusalem. Well, okay, if it was the wrong thing to do, you might hear your Rav. I feel Kulanabi. Wait, so if Rav's not bowing down on the floor because it's forbidden to do so, why is everybody else doing it? So answer number one is Kamei de Rav Havi. The floor in that shul was not uniform. It was only stone floor where Rav was standing. So new. So new Rav just just walk to the back of the shul where there's carpeting and bow down over there. What's the big deal? So here comes my favorite principle. He did not want to impose upon the congregation. Now, what kind of imposition would there be upon the congregation? So you can look at Rashi. Rashi says, Shim Yelech Yamdu Mipanav. Because if you were to walk over to them and when they saw him, they would all have to rise and stand up to give kavod, to give respect to a great rabbinic sage. So because he did not want to cause them to all have to stand up for him, Therefore, he just stayed where he was, and he refrained from bowing on the floor. Okay, fine. So that's answer number one. The other answer perhaps is Rav Pishi Adai Reglaim Hava Avid Ugdeula Damarula La Asur Torah El Pishi Adai Reglaim Bilvan. The way everyone else bowed there was, they would do some form of bowing, but Rav would do, I think what's called spread eagle. He would fully prostrate on the floor. He would spread out completely on the floor when he would bow. And the issue, so Ula says the only issue is when you're on a stone floor and you are fully prostrating. And Rav did not want to fully prostrate on a stone floor, but everyone else who was not fully doing that, it was okay for them. Well, no, can't we ask? So let Rav prostrate on the floor, but do something in between. We're going to see different examples of it. Don't go spread eagle. So the answer is lo mishayin and hugging. He did not want to change his minhag. He did not want to change the way he usually prostrates. If he couldn't do it the way that he generally would, he did not want to do so at all. He didn't want to compromise. Now, a question, I don't have a lot of desk space over here, so I'm not going to open up the Birchas Avram again, but I'll tell you what he says. The question the Birchas Avram asks is, isn't this a violation of the principle known as losis godedu? So just to remind ourselves, actually very relevant for Chol Hamoed, there's a principle called losis godedu. It has at least two different halachic meanings. The one for our purposes is losasu agudos. You shouldn't make multiple agudos. I guess you shouldn't make multiple agudos shaloms. No. What it means is that there should be uniformity in a shul. For instance, the two concerns is either because if there's a lack of uniformity, it'll lead to discord, it'll be machlokis, or it'll appear as if there's shtei Torahs, as if there's two different laws of the Torah. Like I worship the Samaritan Torah, you worship okay. So we all worship different. We all follow different Torahs. So
how can we have a Sephardi and an Ashkenazi minion under one roof?
So what's the answer? What's the answer to Toby? So the question, this comes up, one of the big flashpoints is Chol Hamoed, because if you come to Minyan this morning or tomorrow, you'll see that many men are not wearing tefillin. Some men are wearing tefillin. So the way, I think I've shared this a number of times, that when I was growing up at the Aguda near me, right, Sadie? So you go to the Aguda in Bayswater on a Chol Hamoed morning, the main part of the men's section would have men without tefillin, and the women's section, because women wouldn't, that's not the culture of the community, women don't come during the weekdays, so the men who were wearing tefillin were in the women's section. And in order that there was some separation because of losis godedu. But here's the thing, when is there losis godedu? Either when it appears like there's two different religions, okay, maybe you'll say Ashkenazi and Sephardi Judaism are two different religions. I wouldn't go that far. But the other reason is it'll cause machlokis, it'll cause arguments. I mean, to be honest, to answer the Ashkenazi Sephardic issue without getting too much into real life details, I think I've seen more friction when there's two Ashkenazi minyanim than when there's an Ashkenazi and a Sephardic minyan, because folks can understand that Sephardim want to have their own minhagim, but it's when the younger people split from the older people, or the older people from the younger people, whatever it might be, and they're all Ashkenazi, that's usually when it can lead to more discord. So same thing with the tefillin. Honestly, I've got bigger issues to get into fights with people over. Whether you would choose the word tefillin or not, a Chol Hamoed, like we've got that should be our biggest problem. I don't think that's leading to any machlokes. I hope it's not. So anyway, that's the answer for that. So coming back to Rav, but the question is, so how could Rav refrain from prostrating while everybody else was doing it? So the Birchas Avram says, when is there losis godedu? When you actively do something different than the rest of the congregation. So everyone's saying Nikadesh Shimcha, and you say out loud, Na Ritzcha V'Nakdishcha. The difference between Ashkenazi and Nusach Sfard. But here, Rav was Sheva al Taseh. He remained in place. He didn't do anything. He just refrain from prostrating. Now, if he prostrated in a different manner than everybody else, that would be perhaps a violation of Losis Skodedu. But you can't violate Losis Skodedu passively. You have to actively do something different than everyone else. So by him just remaining in place, Sheva al Tasa, keeping his status quo, he did not violate Losis Skodedu. So this is a really important principle. I'll give you someone actually sent this to me, because whenever I find it like an interesting Makor, I'll share it on my WhatsApp status, which is like, it's kind of funny. There's different social media networks. There's Facebook, Twitter, and different things that I'm connected to. So the people who like on Facebook who respond to things versus the people who look at my WhatsApp statuses, I can tell the WhatsApp statuses are very from people, because like they're not using Facebook, so they're only using WhatsApp statuses as a way to get around the whole ban on social media. So like I post a lot of Makoros on there. I posted this one, I think his name is Frill Freeberg, if I remember correctly. He responded with a source from I forgot what the name of the sefer is, but essentially it said that if you're in a shul where they shake the lulav 8 times and your minutes only do it 4 times, that's okay because you are sheva al tasa. You're refraining from doing it 8 times. But if your minutes to do it 8 times and the shul's doing 4 times, by you doing it additional times, that would be a violation of Losis Skodedu. So you have to actively violate it. Alrighty, back to the Gemara. One final answer. Okay, so back into the Gemara. What are we trying to resolve? Why did Rav refrain from prostrating while everyone else did? Ema, Adam Chashuv Shani. And when someone is a great rabbi, someone is a significant person, it can be different. Why? Rabbi Elazar, so someone who's a great tzaddik or a great sage, they should not prostrate when they're davening unless they are very confident Hashem is going to answer them. Why? Well, imagine the rabbi puts on the entire show and he's prostrating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, asking for tefillos to be answered, and then he doesn't get the answer he's hoping for. It could look pretty bad. Pretty bad optics, no? So basically, I'm not sure when you're confident that you'll be answered, to be honest. I guess you have to be a great sage to know that. But Rav refrained from prostrating because of the floor. There's nothing wrong with the floor or anything. He just was concerned that it would be inappropriate for him as an Adam Chashav to do it. And that's the end of that piece. We have one small piece left before we call it a night. And basically, I've been using the word prostrating, bowing interchangeably, but there's basically 3 main forms of bowing when it comes to Jewish prayer, and we're going to define them right now. Tana Rabbanan, Kida. Kida is category number 1. Kida al apayim. So that is on one's face. Shnemar v'tagu b'sheva apayim aretz. That's number 1. Kriya. Like we say, Banachnu Korim. So Korim, Kriya al birchaim. So v'chein hu omer mechura al birchav. So that's on one's knees. Ishtachava, the 3rd category. So Pishya Dayim V'Raglayim, this is when someone fully spreads out on the floor. Shnemar, Avonavo Anivi, Mechav Achicha, Ishtachva Saka Artsa. That's when Yaakov Avinu chastises Yosef from his dreams. And he says, what, am I, your mother, and all your brothers going to come now and prostrate to you because you're the king? So those are 3 definitions of bowing. Levi Ichavi Kida Kamid Rabbi the Itla. Levi tried to demonstrate how to do Kida, and then he basically, I don't know, he pulled something, or he injured himself in the process, and seemed to have not been able to walk afterwards or walk properly. So, because the method is kind of it's really, you're bending all the way down and using your thumbs for support. I'm trying to imagine myself, and I probably couldn't stretch that much, or I probably hurt myself the same way Levi did. So, Hakagarmale, the Levi causes to himself. From Rabbi Elazar, Lo Ma'itiach Adam Dvarim Kabi Mala, Sher Adam Negado Atiach Dvarim Kabi Mala, Itla Umanu Levi. Levi was actually being punished. We have a tradition, he was being punished because he tiach devarim klape mala. Remember, some of you I know were at the Monday night class when we talked about how the angels in the beginning of creation, they criticized God for creating man. So it's the same language. I'm not sure the best way to translate it. They kind of questioned God. They were impetuous. You know what? Well, what's the official article translation? How they translate "Hitiach Dvarim Klape Mala"? I'm just curious, like what their translation
It says a person should never cast words of complaint upward to heaven.
Okay, I thought they may have had a
I
fancier.
think the word would be challenge, no?
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a literal translation of it. Okay, but yeah, exactly. Basically, he spoke harshly toward God, and this was his punishment for that. So I don't get it. Is it divine punishment, or did he just happen to injure himself? He caused it to himself carelessly. So the answer is Havaha Garmale. The answer is it's both. That because he spoke harshly toward God, therefore, when he was performing the kida, which he thought he could do, that's when God slipped in and made sure it malfunctioned. Okay, one final point, and this will get us on to Kaf Gimel Amid Aleph. Amarav Hiya Bar Avin Chazinu Hula Abaye V'Rav Demati Atzluye. So remember how we talked about that one's not allowed to spread out completely on a stone floor? So the way when they're doing tafnun that Rav and Abaye would get around it is that they kind of like lean a little bit on their side. That way they weren't fully spread out. So it still had that what you might call submissive appearance to it, but they got off on a technicality, so they weren't completely spread out on the floor. Anyway, this is I guess after going through Yom Kippur, this is a very thought-provoking Gemara, and now it makes me think back a lot to what I'm doing over Yom Kippur and hope that I'm doing the right thing. Okay, so a lot of fun concepts. As I said, a lot of fundamental things we saw tonight. We talked about not changing one's minhag. We talked about Los Escotidu. We talked about Tirchan Sibura, 3 aliyos on a fast day, bowing down, how to do it, when you're allowed to, not allowed to do it. So a lot of very important concepts for us to be at least relatively familiar with. So if you don't know, now you know.
Rabbi, question.
Yes,
are there any restrictions for men on Rosh Chodesh? The reason I asked that question is a number of years ago, I happen to have been in Monsey. It was Rosh Chodesh, and I went to a barber shop and it was closed. And he had a sign there, closed Rosh Chodesh.
Interesting. Not remembering offhand, but it would seem, let me just, so you know what it is, the Ritva says, so there is a shita of the Ritva, which is also the opinion of Tosfos in the Seches Shabbos and Chaf Daled Amid Aleph Dibur Maschel O. So you have a significant opinion in the Rishonim, or at least a record in the Rishonim, that many men would refrain from working on Rosh Chodesh as well. So you know it's also funny. The idea of women not working Rosh Chodesh also was that presumably on that day they were coming to shul in order to hear laning as well, and that's so. Like there's like the women of the wall, they come on Rosh Chodesh to do their thing. So it actually, I'm not saying I support the movement in any way, but it actually has that basis in the tradition, at least in that respect. So it's just interesting to think about that. All right. Baruch Tia. Wishing you all a good moed, a good nacht, a good night, and what day of the week is it? Thursday. A good Shabbos. Whenever I say good Shabbos, it's really nothing. I say it's really Shabbos. I don't even know. Okay. Take care, guys.